The Blood of Heroes, as it was known in the US, a boring generic name, or The Salute of the Jugger, an awesome cool name as everywhere else knew it as, is a movie I'd have sworn I'd never heard of before, but was recommended to me by a long-time viewer of this channel as one I'd probably really enjoy. He was not wrong, because I loved this. And I also realised that I'd seen it numerous times before, I just never realised what it was called before. You get an all-star cast, including Rutger Hauer at the very peak of his powers. It has a whole bunch of vibes, and if you like those particular vibes, you'll love it. If you don't, then you'll probably hate it. Nowhere is this more evident than on Rotten Tomatoes, where this movie holds an incredible 13% rating from professional critics, once again proving much like Jon Snow, they know nothing, because the audience score is a way more accurate 76%, with Richard Harrington writing in the Washington Post describing the film as a multi-million-dollar movie with about as much plot and depth as your average arcade game, but it's never quite as involving. Kind of not wrong, but at the same time, entirely wrong. This film's plot is about as deep as a 1mm puddle, but it's not really about that. It's about the vibes that its weird mashup plot provide. Because this is a sports trope film, wrapped in a post-apocalypse trope aesthetic, two things I love. The post-apocalyptic world is introduced by an opening text card followed by a long slow pan through this ramshackle desert town, which we later come to learn are called dog towns. Dogs seemingly being one of the few sources of proteins left, along with lizards and bugs in this world created by wars during the 20th century, that nobody even remembers anymore. Weirdly, one of the big criticisms of this film by critics is that it doesn't do a great job at world building. I can't disagree more. It does a fantastic job at world building by having the world exist as a real living place in the background of the film. It never feels the need to explain the world to you because it assumes you have eyes and a brain. They actually shot the film on location in Coober Pedy, a South Australian mining town out in the desert. It instantly gives the film that desolate post-apocalyptic vibe because the outback looks like that without the need for any window dressing, which leads to a whole load of glorious post-apocalyptic cinematography as our band of heroes trudge from Dogtown to Dogtown. Then they throw in little details like the fact a lot of the dog towns they go to have almost no food. Some are seemingly existing on what appears to be tree bark. So when you go to the city, which was earlier described as a luxurious place, and you see it and well, it looks like this, which I can only describe as the last level of Dante's Inferno. You do wonder to yourself, what's so luxurious about this? Then they bring out the meat pies. And as an Antipodean who has lived in this pie-free zone called Asia for over a decade, let me tell you, anywhere that has meat pies is luxurious. Then you have the actual meat to this film's plot, which is the very typical sports trope of a former disgraced sports player taking a band of plucky amateur up-and-comers and against all odds taking them to the big game and winning it all. That admittedly is the entirety of Salute to the Jugger's plot when you really boil it down to its bare bones, but it's really way more than that because the game, as the sport is known, is actually fairly well fleshed out, and there's a philosophical undertone to the whole affair. The game reminds me strongly of a cross between the original game of football, which spawned the modern sports of hand-egg, rugby, and the best of a lot, actual football, where two villagers would try and drive a ball, usually made from a pig's bladder, to a goal. These could be miles apart, and each team would consist of hundreds, maybe even thousands of players. Violence and even deaths were not uncommon in teams attempting to gain control of a ball, hence the sport was banned at least twice. In fact, the two earliest known mentions of football in England are both from the King, banning it in 1314 and 1409. The other thing it reminds me of is the 1990s ITV light entertainment classic Gladiators, with the film predating the show actually coming out in 1989, where groups of amateur athletes would try and compete in various games against the gladiators in an attempt to win a prize. In the fictional game, players known as Juggers have to get a dog skull onto a stick, with the game running for 3 periods of 100 stones. This period of time being however long it takes someone to bend down and throw 100 stones at a target that appears to be no more than 6 to 8 feet or so away from them. There are 5 player positions: the quick, which is the only unarmed player and the one whose job it is to actually drive the skull towards the stick. The slash, backcharge and drive are all armed with a pugil-like stick which they use to bash the opposition out of the quick's way, allowing them to advance the skull. One other player, possibly called the Griffer, employs a chain net that they swing around their heads, again in an attempt to create space for the quick. Watching this sport probably takes up more than 50% of this film's 90-minute runtime. A quick aside on the runtime: the original international release of this movie ran for 104 minutes, but for whatever reason, along with the name change, this was cut to 90 minutes for the US release. I could only acquire a copy of this US version. The action that the sport provides is bloody and fairly exhilarating, if a little bit obvious in its outcomes. Like I said previously, this film's plot is just one long sport trope, so if you are aware of the trope, you know exactly what's coming. Not that that ever ruined my enjoyment of the film, because the game is such an awesome sport that people actually started playing it for real. Yes, you can play Jugger in real life. I don't think you can gouge somebody's eyes out though. I'm also a sucker for sports movies. The plot also asks a fairly philosophical question: why do we even play sports when we could at any moment be seriously injured, maimed, or even worse, die? Because the game is incredibly violent and dangerous. According to the opening text card, not even the Juggers know when the game came to be or why, but like everything else in life, even the game is exploited for the benefit of the elites, who live in 9 underground cities and live in almost opulent decadence in contrast to everyone else in this world. Each city has their own team who play each other in the League, teams whose players live lives of luxury and wealth. At first, our band of Juggers appear to be playing the game merely to survive, playing for food, water and a little tribute if they beat the local villagers' team, going from town to town. Then later, 2 of them at least play because they dream of joining the League and gaining fabulous riches, with others still playing for the camaraderie that only team sports can bring. I'm sure some just play for the thrill or the enjoyment of it. It's a surprisingly philosophical undertone for such a trope-heavy post-apocalyptic sports movie, but one, unsurprisingly, it never really even attempts to answer. Maybe it did in the longer international cut. If all of that doesn't convince you, then how about the cast? It's all-star for what is a low-budget post-apocalyptic B-movie. Rutger Hauer is the leader of the Juggers and the aforementioned disgraced former pro looking for redemption. As always, Hauer is fantastic here, getting by far the best line in the entire film.
This is stupid. We should be fucking and drinking by now.
Joan Chen is the amateur up-and-comer who dreams of joining the League and sleeping in silk sheets and fucking people who don't have scars, which is ironic because Joan Chen does not have scars at any point that would put any red-blooded male off fucking her. Vincent D'Onofrio, who only 2 years prior had given a mesmerizing performance as Private Pyle in Full Metal Jacket, is the other player who dreams of joining the League, along with Joan Chen's character. He's admittedly not given quite as much great material to work with here, but he's still pretty great. Delroy Lindo is criminally underused as a background character. I think he literally says 4 lines in the entire film, but he's here and he's still Delroy Lindo, so manages those 4 lines with aplomb. There's not a whole lot else to say about the Salute of the Juggers. It has a soundtrack that in typical sports film fashion swells and falls when it's supposed to, and does its job in making the on-screen action seem more exciting than it probably really is. In the end, whether you love or hate this film is almost certainly going to come down to whether you vibe with its post-apocalyptic sports vibes. One thing for sure, it's nowhere near as bad as that 13% Rotten Tomatoes rating would suggest. If you liked that, then like, comment and subscribe, because next week I'll be back with another sci-fi sports action film, a viewer requested I review.